Hi, this is Ali Arango of Little Guy CGI, and today I would like to show you how to make a male human head inside of Blender 2.79. So let's get started. Okay, if this is your first time in Blender, I recommend you go to File, User Preferences, go to Input, and then choose Select with left click. Blender's default select is with right click, and this may confuse you if you're coming from Adobe programs or other 3D programs. Okay, while you're in the user preferences, click on add-ons, put a check mark next to 3D navigation, put a check mark next to 3D display tools, then scroll down. Put a check mark next to Mesh Auto Mirror. Put a check mark next to Mesh Edit Tools 2, Mesh F2, Mesh Inset Polygon, Mesh Loop Tools, as well as Mesh Relax. Okay, now we're going to scroll down more. Now we want to put a check mark next to Pi Menu 3D Viewport Pi Menus, as well as put a check mark next to Pi Menu UI Pi Menu Official. Okay, when you first come into Blender, you'll see the default cube right here to manipulate your view in Blender. If you hold the middle mouse button, you can rotate the view. If you hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button, you can pan the view up and down. You can hold Control and then push your mouse in while holding the middle mouse button. Also, while still holding Control as well as the middle mouse button, if I pull the other direction, I'll zoom out. If you look to your left, you'll see a tab that says Display. If you click here, you'll see a bunch of different buttons that will allow you to quickly maneuver your view as you work in Blender. Okay, what we're going to be doing today is making a human head. We're going to do a quick base mesh of the basic shape of the head and the neck from box modeling. We're then going to move into sculpting. Currently, we're in object mode. When you come into Blender, you're in object mode. What we want to do now is we want to make sure we have the cube selected. You can tell that you have the cube selected because it has this orange outline around it. What we're going to do now is click here and then click here to go into edit mode. Okay, what you want to do now is click here to go to front view. When you look here, you can see which view you're in. So we're in front perspective mode. Perspective mode is a view that pretty much shows you your image workspace like you're looking at 3D, right? We don't want that. What we want right now is to have our cube just about look like we're looking at a blueprint. And to do that, what we want to do is we want to be in front orthographic mode instead of front perspective mode, which you can see here. So see where this says view perspective / ortho. We'll just left click here. Now we're in front orthographic mode. Okay, what we want to do now is give our cube more geometry for us to work with. So what we're going to do is press W. When we press the W's key, this brings up our specials menu. What we want to do is go to where we see Subdivide Smooth. So we're going to left click here. We can see that our cube is now subdivided. We want to look immediately to our left where we see the number of cuts. We want to take this number of cuts up to 3. Okay, when you work in Blender as well as other 3D programs, typically one of the ways that you will manipulate your 3D mesh is you will use vertices, edges, as well as faces, which you can see right here. So if we click here, we can manipulate vertices. If we click here, we can manipulate edges. If we click here, we can manipulate faces. So right now we want to have this selected so we can manipulate vertices. Okay, in Blender, if you want to select everything, you can press A. You can also deselect everything by pressing A. So we're going to press A to deselect our mesh. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to grab these three vertices right here. So when you look, let me zoom in so you can see better. So here's one row here. We don't want this row of, or this group of vertices right here. We don't want these ones right here. We want these ones right here. So we're going to click here, and then we're going to hold shift. The reason why we're holding shift is because when you hold shift in Blender, this allows you to select more than one vertice, edge, or face at a time. So while holding shift, I'm clicking these three vertices here. So now I'm letting go of shift. Okay, so now that we have these three vertices selected here, we want to turn to our right view. We can do that easily by clicking here. So now we're in a right orthographic view. Remember, the orthographic view is kind of like a blueprint view. It allows us to see 3D objects as if they're like 2D objects. This a lot of times makes it easier to work in 3D. So what we're going to do now is hold shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan this up some. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom out some. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to activate our proportional editing tool. So to do that, we're going to press the O key. When you look here, you can see this blue circle right here. This lets us know that the proportional editing tool is currently turned on. As I'm hovering over this, you can actually see the tooltip there saying, this is the proportional editing mode. And it tells you a little bit about this tool. Okay, the reason why we have these three vertices selected is because we basically want to pull a chin shape out of this, which now for the most part looks like this looks circular. So we want to pull a chin out of this. So we have our proportional editing tool turned on. The proportional editing tool allows you to move more than one vertex, edge, or face at a time. And that's nice because without the proportional editing tool, if we just pull down, only these three vertices would move down. But because the proportional editing tool is on, as we pull down, the rest of the vertices, edges, as well as faces will basically adjust accordingly as we move it down. So we're going to press G. Pressing G allows us a few good things. One of the things that allows us is we can actually pull those vertices down. However, if you look at that circle right there, when we press G, that circle shows us the area of influence for the proportional editing tool, which is very useful. So what we're going to do is pull down. Now, as I pull down, see how that chin part gets pointy? I'm going to push this forward some. What I want to do now is I am rolling my mouse wheel. And as I roll the mouse wheel, hopefully you can see that the rest of the geometry is adjusting is adjusting as I roll the mouse wheel. So I'll pull down a little more like that, and then I'll roll the mouse again like that. So now that I have this, basically what I want, which is a basic head shape with a chin shape coming down, I'm going to left click to lock in that movement that I did. Okay, now those three vertices basically did what we wanted, so we're going to press A to deselect them. Now, we also don't currently need the proportional editing tool turned on, so we're going to press O to turn that off. Then we're going to click here to go to face select. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. With face select on, I'm going to press the C key. When I press the C key, this activates something called paint select. And what this does is wherever this circle goes, I will select when I hold down the left mouse button. So I can roll my mouse wheel to make this circle bigger, or roll it the other way to make this smaller. So I'm going to left click here and then left click here. So I have these 8 faces here selected. So now I'm going to right click to come out of paint select mode. Or I guess it's just paint select. Okay, so with these 8 faces selected, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button to rotate the view. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to press the E key to extrude, and then I'm going to pull this extrusion out like this. I'm going to left click. Now I'm going to take this manipulator here. This is what this is. This blue, green, as well as red shape right here is the manipulator that I'm talking about. I'm going to push this forward some like that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to press S to scale. And then after pressing S, I'm going to hold Shift. And while holding Shift, I'm going to press Z. So what you see there is all those lines going out. Those lines are showing you how this is going to scale out. So now I'm going to left click to lock that in. When I pressed Shift Z, I scaled in every direction except for the Z axis. Okay, so with this done, I'm going to hold the middle mouse button so you can see, the basic shape that was formed from us extruding this out and then scaling. Now I'm going to hover my mouse here. I'm going to hold Control. While holding Control, I'm going to press the R key. This put a loop cut in, and that's what you see right there. It actually put a loop cut preview in. I'm going to roll my mouse wheel once to bring in another loop cut. I'm then going to left click once. I'm going to move these loop cuts down slightly, and because I only left clicked once, I was able to move these loop cuts. So now I'm going to left click a second time, and now these loop cuts are locked in. Okay, now with these loop cuts still selected, what we're going to do is we're going to press S to scale. We're going to hold Shift, and then while holding Shift, we're going to press Z, very similar to what we did before. And now we're going to push in like this. I'm then going to left click to lock that scale in. Okay, what we're going to do now is press A to deselect. I like this method of forming a basic head shape as well as neck shape because it's fairly quick. Typically, on another note, when you work in 3D, one of the ways you can reduce your workload is you would take a mesh like this. You would get rid of one half of this and apply a mirror modifier to this. Here in Blender 2.79, I'm going to click the Tools panel. I'm going to scroll this down. When we look here, see where this says Auto Mirror? I'm going to click this black triangle. See where it says Auto Mirror here? We click this button here. And basically what Blender did was Blender automatically put on a mirror modifier and has it arranged along the x-axis. This is absolutely spectacular. This add-on just makes me happy. It doesn't take that long to put a mirror modifier onto a mesh. However, seconds do tend to add up. So this is absolutely spectacular, this add-on. Okay, so what we're going to do now is press A to deselect. Okay, if you're new to Blender, by us having this mirror modifier on here, if I click here, you can actually see the mirror modifier here. By us having this mirror modifier on here, whatever work we do to the one side will be replicated to the other side. So what we're going to do now is we're going to spend most of our time in sculpting mode and not here in edit mode. However, this is useful to know about. So what we want to do is we're going to click here, and we're going to push down here and then push this forward here like that. I'm going to click here. I'm going to hold Shift and click here. So I click these two edges here. Because we have the mirror modifier on, this is also clicked on the other side. So with that done, I'm just going to push this forward some like that. Now I'm going to press A to deselect. Okay, we're going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. We want to add a subdivision surface modifier to our mesh to increase the geometry. See this square right here? This is, one of the faces of our mesh, right? We could add a subdivision surface modifier to this mesh by clicking here, as well as going here and then clicking subdivision surface. We're going to use a shortcut. We're going to press A, and then we're going to hold Control, and then while holding Control, we're going to press 2. And then what that did was that added this subdivision surface modifier with a view of 2 to our mesh. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to click here. This looks like our subdivision surface modifier has been applied when we click this button. What we want to do now is we want to apply this mirror modifier as well as actually apply the subdivision surface modifier. So I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click here and then click here to go to object mode. Okay, here in object mode, what we're going to do is click apply. So now our mirror modifier has been applied to our mesh. And now we're going to click apply. So now our subdivision surface has been applied to our mesh. And as far as what apply means, basically the mirror modifier had, made this be just a half of a mesh. It made it being the mirror modifier made it look like there was a full mesh, but there wasn't. Now that the mirror modifier is applied, there's an actual mesh here, okay, as far as both sides. And then the geometry that we had, the subdivision surface modifier, made things appear like there was more geometry. However, now that we applied the subdivision surface modifier, there actually is more geometry here. So I'm going to press Z and then select Shade Smooth, just so our mesh looks smooth. Okay, I want to not see this grid floor, so I'm going to press the N key to bring up our properties panel. I'm going to scroll down to display. I'm going to click this black triangle. I'm then going to go to where we see grid floor. I'm going to take this check mark away by clicking there. I'm then going to press the N key to take away that properties panel. Okay, basically what's going on now is we're setting up to prepare our mesh to go into sculpt mode. One of the other things we want to do is we need even more geometry. As far as setting things up to go into sculpt mode, there's multiple ways of doing this. This is the current way that I've learned to do this and how, I'm currently showing you now. So what we're going to do now is we need more geometry. So we're going to click here, and then what we're going to do is add a multi-resolution modifier to our mesh. So we're going to left click here. And then what we see here is this multi-resolution modifier. Now to have this modifier work, we need to actually click this subdivide button. So what I'm going to do is click this once. When I click this once, you can see this says preview 1, sculpt 1, render 1. I'm going to click subdivide again. So now we have this up to 2. And this is increasing the geometry on our head mesh. Okay, so far we've been in object mode. We first came into Blender, you were in object mode. We went to edit mode, we made this basic shape. Now we're going to click here, and then we're going to click here to go to sculpt mode. So here we are in sculpt mode. I'm going to move this slider up to the top here. Okay, basically when you were in object mode as well as edit mode, more edit mode than object mode, you tend to box model things. And you arrange the faces, vertices, edges, as well as faces to get the shape that you want. You have to arrange things in, a way to get the shape that you want. And you have to be very conscious of how you're arranging things because you are arranging faces. In sculpt mode, you pretty much are free to do within reason what you want. Almost any shape that you can think of to make, you can just make it in sculpt mode. Think of, as far as working with different 3D programs, the edit mode as far as a Blender is very similar to what you would find in Maya or 3ds Max. If you were talking about other 3D programs, the sculpt mode in Blender is very similar to what you would find as far as ZBrush. As far as sculpting versus box modeling, what I've found out recently, they both have their strengths. If you sculpt something and you want to animate it, pretty much what you have to do is you have to retypologize your sculpt. And basically what that means is it's almost like you are box modeling over top of your sculpt. If you have to do work very quickly, it's very useful to know how to box model because you can pretty much box model and have your mesh ready to go as far as be rigged. You're just not as free as far as forming your actual shapes. As far as my own personal thoughts on box modeling as well as sculpting, what I've decided currently is I am going to box model what I can box model and what is best for box modeling. And then I'm going to sculpt where sculpt gives me an advantage over box modeling. That's why we basically box model the basic shape of this head. And now we're pretty much going to sculpt the actual face. Okay, something else I want to mention about sculpting versus box modeling. Basically, box modeling does not tend to take as much power as sculpting. Sculpting, it tends to help, as far as I can say, a lot, having a powerful computer. The current computer I am on is an Alienware laptop. I have a GTX 1070. I have 32 gigs of RAM on this computer. For my main RAM, as far as my GTX, I believe it has 8 gigs of RAM inside of my graphics card. The reason why I'm telling you this is I just want you to be aware of what I am using to sculpt. So try to, follow along. If you have problems sculpting, it could be because of the computer you're currently on. And as you guys work your way through this tutorial, let me know, how this works out as far as your different computers that you're on, as far as the different specs. I'm curious about that myself. Okay, as far as the method, I'm going to use you to show you how I sculpt this. This is my method that I've come up with largely from watching lots of tutorials on sculpting. There's many different ways of doing this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click display. I'm going to click here to go to front view. I'm going to click on tools. When we click on tools, what you see here is a draw brush. Here in sculpt mode, when we click here, we see all of these different brushes right here. Just to give you a quick overview on the brushes that I use for the most part, I like the Blob Brush. Doesn't seem to be that most people do like this. People tend to like the clay strips brush. The Blob Brush, I like it and favor it because it adds geometry very quickly. So this tends to be the brush that I use the most. I use the clay strips brush typically to add more geometry to a mesh while using something called dynamic typology. I'll explain a little bit about that more later. I use the crease brush, which I love. The crease brush allows you to put creases in things, which you can kind of see from the image here. However, the crease brush also allows you to sharpen things. In sculpt mode, basically when you work with a brush, you have two different modes of the brush. You have add as well as subtract. When you do the opposite of the crease, you actually make things sharper, which is very useful. The flatten brush is like a super strong smooth brush, which is right here. The smooth brush you tend to use a lot because it's just something you use just about constantly. You use a smooth brush so much that when you hold shift here in Blender will automatically, as long as you're holding shift, switch to the smooth brush. So the flatten brush I kind of use as if the smooth brush isn't working quickly enough, I use the flatten brush. The grab brush lets you grab and pull shapes. I use this a lot as far as sculpting. It is similar to the snake hook brush. However, the grab brush pulls geometry. The snake hook brush is very similar to the grab brush, but it actually adds geometry as you pull it. The inflate brush I use to add mass to meshes in a very smooth way, so I tend to use this a decent amount. The mask brush is extremely useful because in sculpting, a lot of times it helps to protect areas. So what the mask brush basically allows you to do is protect a certain area as you're working with an area next to the area you're protecting, and then you can invert that area. The pinch brush is similar to the crease brush. However, the pinch brush I find useful in that it will let you sharpen areas as well as shrink those areas at the same time. The draw brush is similar to how I use the Blob Brush. It's kind of like a lowered down version of the draw brush as far as how I use it. And these are the main brushes that we'll be using as we work our way through our sculpt, or making our head, our male head, mesh. So I'm going to click here to come out of that brush menu. Okay, other things you should know about here in sculpt mode. I'm going to hover here and pull this out. Right here, we can increase this to increase the radius of our brush. That circle you'll see right there is a radius. I tend to like to press F. When I press F, I can pull and make this area bigger. Now left click, I lock that in, or I can press F, push the other way, and make this area of influence smaller. Okay, by moving this slider here, you can increase as well as decrease the strength of your brush. Remember I told you about the different modes, the add and subtract. You can add or subtract. So see this right here, this draw brush. Right now, if I draw, basically what you'll see is the mesh come out in the towards basically whatever the size is of the brush here, right? If I click subtract, instead of seeing this come out like you see in the image here, you would have the opposite. This actually would go in instead of come out. Okay, something else that you should be aware of here in sculpting mode is that sculpting mode has its own version of almost like a mirror modifier. If we click here, see where it says mirror X? So when you come into sculpting mode, automatically what you do on this side is mirrored to this side here, which is a big help usually. However, if you don't want that, you can just come in here and then just click here and take that symmetry lock off. Okay, what we're going to do now is click here, go to the Blob Brush. I'm going to hold Shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to use this to shape, get some more basic shapes in, then we'll apply this, then we'll move on to dynamic typology. So I'm going to press F to increase the size of my brush. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to basically draw our brow line right here. All right, so think of this as our eyes will be right underneath here. Now what we're going to do is draw a line coming down here. And this is going to be basically our nose. Now because the nose comes out more in the bottom, what we're going to do is go over the nose again and we'll turn to the side to see what we see there. What we're going to do now is we're going to click here, go to our grab brush. We're going to press F to increase the size. We're going to grab the tip of the nose and pull that out like that. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to pull the nose in a little like that. We're going to click here. We're going to go to our inflate brush. We're going to bring out the area here somewhat for the mouth. I am turning to the side just so I can see how far I actually have that coming out. The reason why we're doing this is the mouth actually, comes out. It's not flat, against the rest of the face. Okay, by having this bit of geometry here, this helps us as far as, where our eyes are going to go, as well as setting up the rest of our face. We also want to be aware of the different planes of the face. Typically, there's a plane that comes like this down here, as well as here. There's a kind of a flat plane right here, kind of a flat plane right here, and then planes along the side of the head right here. So whenever we want to smooth something out, we can hold I'm holding the middle mouse button to turn. I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. We can hold our Shift key, and then you'll see this. Right now we have the inflate brush, right? So I'm holding down Shift, right? And my hand is holding down Shift right now. So now, see, as I'm holding down left, automatically Blender switched to the smooth brush. So as long as I'm holding Shift, Blender is trying to smooth right here. And the reason why I'm smoothing right here is I'm trying to basically get a somewhat flattened area right here for the plane of the head that is on the side of the head right here. So I let go, and you can see that, a little there. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're actually going to click here to go to object mode. We're just going to object mode so we can apply this multi-resolution modifier. So we're going to click apply. So now all of that extra geometry is added to our mesh now. So with that done, and with our mesh still selected, we'll click here, and then we'll click here to go back into scope mode. Okay, when we apply the multi-resolution modifier, we have extra geometry. However, we are going to need a lot more geometry to do the details of the face, even than what the multi-resolution modifier was giving us at the levels that we had it set up for. So to get those details, what we're going to do is we're going to look to here. We're going to put a check mark here, which this enables our dynamic typology option. We're going to click this black triangle here. And now we can see that our mesh kind of has like this squared look to it again. Okay, yeah, I like the smooth shading rather than this flat shading here. So I'm gonna go to here. We see smooth shading. I'm gonna put a check mark right here. So now we have our smooth look back. Okay, I find that the options for dynamic typology work well. The change I'm going to make is I'm going to click here and I'm going to change this setting to 5.8. I'm then going to left click here to lock that in. Okay, what dynamic typology does is we could have used our multi-resolution mesh, taken up the detail and basically had the same detail throughout this mesh, which was a huge amount of detail, and use that to sculpt. However, it's not necessary to do that if we don't want that. And the way we can get the same amount of detail or similar amount is by using this dynamic typology. So what dynamic typology is, it gives you the detail basically where you need it. So the main detail we need is right here. We're not going to need a huge amount of detail right here, as well as around around the back of the head. So dynamic typology gives you what you need as far as as far as where you are currently working at. Okay, one of the things that tends to work well, I find, is when things start to get kind of pixely looking. Typically what we'll do, we'll go into clay strips, we'll put some clay strips down by rubbing the brush over it, then we'll smooth that area out. Right now what we're going to do is go to our blob brush, we're going to zoom in, and we're going to make a depression here for the eye. So right now we're on the blob brush and we're set for add. When I hold control, automatically Blender will go to the opposite of what we currently have selected here. So when I hold control, we'll go to subtract, and that's what we want because we want to make a depression here. So I'm going to hold control. I'm holding control now. So now what I'm doing is I am taking my brush and I am making this depression here. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I let go of the left mouse button. One thing with the blob brush, if you hold and move your mouse, you'll get a certain level of quickness as far as adding or taking away geometry. However, if you let go and then restart, it seems like the blob brush will work even quicker as far as, whether you're adding or taking away geometry. Anyway, I am still holding the control button down. I'm going to go like this. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing basically a depression next to the nose, actually going into the nose a little bit like that. I'm letting go of control now, and I'm holding them in the mouse button just to take a look. Okay, as far as doing this, just watching different sculpting tutorials, it seems like, basically what we're doing is we're putting a face on. The face basically goes on the human skull, right? So you have if you think of a skull in your mind, you kind of have like the cheekbones that kind of go like this, and then you have the teeth that are basically right here. That bone protrudes most right here. So this kind of like helps to set up the nose and flattens out this area right here. So we're about to flatten this out. So that's kind of what this is. If you're like, that's strange, which I kind of thought when I first saw people doing it. But it tends to, I find, work well. Just like this area right here automatically sets us up for this brow area here. And it works. It's easy to remember because it's a very basic shape. So what we're going to do now is hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan up. I held shift and the middle mouse button to pan up. I'm now going to click here, then click here to go to crease mode. Okay, we're going to use this crease brush to basically draw a mouth. So I'm going to press F to shrink the brush size for my crease brush. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a mouth. And see how this is kind of almost rough looking? What we can do is click here, click on the clay strips. I'm going to press F, increase the area of for the brush, for the clay strips. I'm actually going to go over this like this, right? And by me making these, they're kind of like layers. Now when I hold shift, I smooth out this area. So you might sit there and say, what's going on? Why are you doing that? The reason why I'm doing this is I just let go of shift is this just added geometry because we're working with dynamic typology. Remember I was telling you this will give us the geometry where we need. So using the clay strips and then smoothing this out is a nice way to get more geometry while using dynamic typology. Okay, so now I'm going to click here, go back to the crease brush. I'm going to press F to decrease the size for the crease brush, and now I'm going to draw that mouth again, and hopefully you can see that the area is more defined. And I'm not talking about the line, I'm talking about the area around the line. So by doing that, we drew, you know, a basic mouth right here. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click here, go to the inflate brush. I'm going to build up this cheekbone area here. I press F to increase the size of the brush. So now I'm just going like this, and then I'm going to go like this. I'm going to come down to the chin area and go like this. Now I'm just taking a look. I'm going to go to the grab brush, press F to increase the area of influence, pull this down some like that. I'm going to pull out from here like that. I'm going to press shift. Sometimes you can get too much, as you just saw. Okay, we should have an ear that's right here. So the ear generally goes from the eye to the bottom of the nose. So what we can do is I'm going to press F to decrease the area of this brush. We're going to use the masked brush. And the way we're going to use that is we're going to basically make the shape of what we want. And this is actually very cool. I'm going to hold control. While holding control, I'm going to hold shift. I'm going to look at the eye line right here. Look at the nose line right there. I'm saying, okay, I want the ear to be in between that. So I'm going to come here, pull down like this, and I'm holding control and shift. That's how I'm drawing this. I'm drawing out, you know, basic shape of an ear. So now I let go of control and shift. So we have this basic shape of an ear here, right? So what this is here is that control shift activated this brush right here. All right. Similar to how when you hold shift, the smooth brush is activated. Okay, so what you see here is a mask, this black area. So whatever is covered by this black area, we cannot affect. This is very useful because we want to draw a, bring out an ear from here, right? So you sit there and say, okay, this is, covered. So you just say you can't affect that. Well, what we can do is hold control. While holding control, we can press the I key. So what we did was we inverted that mask. So now what was the mask, everything else is the mask, and now we can affect this area. So what we're going to do is go to the blob brush. We're going to click here to select our blob brush. This part of the ear is thinner. This part of the ear is thicker. So we're going to start off at the back part of the ear like this. I'm going to take a look. Okay. I'm going to add some more, and I am, purposely adding more here. So I'm holding the middle mouse button to take a look. I'm going to click here, then go to the grab brush. I'm going to press F to increase the size of my grab brush. I'm going to pull this out more like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Alt, and while holding Alt, I'm going to press M. And what that did was that took away our mask. Okay, so in sculpt mode, the mask brush is extremely useful. Right here, I want to bring this part of the head in here. This is coming out too much. So what I can do is I can also press B for box select. And when I press B for box select, this lets me draw a mask as well. So we have a mask drawn like this. So all of this area of the head is protected. So now what we can do is press F and manipulate our mesh without being too concerned about things that we necessarily don't, want to get affected, like our face here. And then we can just hold Alt while holding Alt, press M. And we have these marks here. You might sit there and say, oh, what about that? We just hold Shift, and you can see the smooth brush activating, and that allows us to, smooth those lines out there. So very cool. For right now, what we're going to do is I'm holding Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. We'll hold Shift and we'll smooth this out here. I'm going to click here, go to the crease brush, and use this to put a crease right here. I'll hold Shift and smooth this out some, like that. We can smooth, holding the middle mouse button to rotate. We can hold and Shift right here to smooth this out. Holding Shift again, holding the middle mouse button to rotate. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to click here to go back to the Blob Brush. We're going to hold Control, and we're going to make a depression for the inside of the ear here. Okay, now what we're going to do is the ear kind of goes like this. So one of the cool things in sculpting is this would be somewhat difficult as far as box modeling. We can fairly easily make the shape of an ear. So what we're going to do is we're going to go like this. Kind of like basically come around like that. I'm holding the middle mouse button to take a look. Okay, I'm going to roll the mouse wheel in. I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold Control and the middle mouse button to zoom in. When I hold Control and the middle mouse button to zoom in, instead of rolling the middle mouse button, most of the time it's because I want to have a smooth zoom. I'm going to press F to increase the area of influence. I'm going to hold Shift. I want to hold Shift because even though we're on the Blob Brush, I want to smooth this out. Because I'm holding Shift, Blender automatically activates the smooth brush when I hold down Shift and left click. So I'm just smoothing this area here. Okay, what we want to do now is we're actually going to work on the mouth area here. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a mask like this shape here. We're going to come up here. We're going to dodge the nose so that we have this whole area here masked. So to do that, we're going to hold down Control. While holding Control, we're going to hold Shift. We're going to start dragging right from here. And you can see that dotted line starting to form. So we're just, going up around here to the nose and then down to about here. Now we're only coming about here because the sculpt mode mirrors. So now when I let go, you can see that the mask is mirrored to here. Okay, the area we want to work with is this area here. So we drew this mask around here. So this is currently protected. We can't touch this area. So what we're going to do is hold Control, and then while holding Control, press I. So now we inverted that selection. So now this is the area that we can touch and everything else is protected, which is what we want. Okay, so while we're doing this specifically to work on the lips. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom in. I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. Roll the mouse wheel to zoom in more. I'm going to click here and then click here to go to the crease brush. Okay, we want to use the crease brush to basically draw the shape of our upper lip. I'm going to press F to decrease the size. I pressed F and pushed N. What we want to use is the add version of our crease brush. The default for the crease, unlike the other brushes, is subtract. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this as it is, but we're going to hold Control, which is going to make the crease brush be add. So I'm holding down Control, So now what I'm doing is I'm just going like this, and you can see the crease brush is drawing out the shape of that upper lip. And what's going on, because we're holding control, is it's making the crease come out instead of go in. So it's giving us a nice sharp edge here for the lip. So now I'm going to let go of the control button. Okay, I wanted to make this come out more. So what I'm going to do is click here, then click here. I'm going to deflate. So now I'm going to kind of dodge this edge here and inflate this lip. So now I'm looking to the side. Zoom back to see. I'm going to click here, go to the grab brush. I think this lip can be bigger. So I'm just grabbing here, and I'm actually taking a grab brush and I'm pushing up to increase the distance of that upper lip. And now that I have this here, and see how the mask is helping us protect that bottom lip, now what we're going to do is pull out to the side like this. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold control and the middle mouse button to zoom back. You want the upper lip to be further out than the lower lip. So right now they're about equal, they being the upper lip as well as the lower lip, or what's going to be the lower lip. So what we're going to do is we're going to press F and increase our grab brush even more, because we have all of this protected besides here. So what we're going to do is grab this lip. We're going to pull this forward. So as you pull forward, you want to pay attention to the nose. I mean, obviously you don't want this to pass the nose. So now I'm just, pushing down some here. I'm holding shift now to smooth that out. And now we can see this is definitely past what I'm going to zoom in by rolling the mouse button, holding shift to smooth this out. I'm trying to be careful to, holding shift again, to dodge this sharp edge here. Okay, so now what's cool about this mask that we drew here is what we can do is hold control, and then while holding control, press I. So now we inverted this mask. So now that upper lip, that work we did there is protected. Now we can work on this bottom lip here. Okay, what we're going to do now is click here and then click here to go to our crease brush. We're going to press F to decrease the size of the crease brush. And what we're going to do is zoom in more. I'm going to hold control, and then while holding control, I'm going to draw out a bottom lip. Very similar to what we did with the top. Like that. I'm going to click here, give this some more volume with the inflate brush. I try to be careful. You might sit there and say, well, the lip's up, you probably should pull it down. I try to be careful with that because as we work on the face, this tends to come down sometimes more than I want. I'm going to press F. I will bring this down. Some like that. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to press F to decrease the area of influence for our grab brush as well as our smooth brush, because when I hold shift, so I'm holding shift to smooth this area out here. Zooming in, I'm smoothing here, actually making a depression rather than smoothing some right there. Okay, now I'm going to hold Alt, and then while holding Alt, press M to take our mask off. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hold Shift, smooth this right here. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to click here. We're going to go to our clay strips brush. We're coming here because we want to increase the geometry on the nose. Zooming in, I'm holding Shift and middle mouse button to pan. And I'm going over the nose area with the intention of increasing this geometry. The geometry should increase by what we're doing because of the uh, dynamic typology option that we're using. I'm going to click here, go to the grab brush. I'm going to press F to increase our area of influence. I'm going to bring the nose out some more. I'm going to press F. I want the nose to dip down some there. I want there to be more of a indent here, so I'll grab that, push that in. I'll hold shift to smooth this out. As far as our nostrils, the nostrils we can make very easily by having our grab brush basically aiming. Think of the right on the tip of that white arrow. I'm going to grab and I just pull the nostrils out just like that. It's very nice. That is working on things like noses for the with the sculpt mode is lovely. Okay, the reason why I say lovely is just, you know, when you're box modeling a nose, you can get a nice shape of a nose from box modeling. You just have a lot less freedom. I'm going to click here, click here. I'm going to press F to shrink the area of influence for our blob brush. We're just going to get an angle so we can kind of see an upward view of the nose. We're going to hold control, and then we can just, you know, just like this. I'm letting go of the left mouse button. I'm still holding control, and now I'm clicking again, trying to get more of the influence of the blob brush. Okay, so now we have nostrils. What I like to do then is click here, click the grab brush, press F, and the nostrils tend to be kind of facing up from doing that. So then what I do is I grab right here, right on the tip. So right here. And then I basically pull down. So now we don't have the nostrils on that angle so much, you know. And it depends on, you know, what you want and what you're going for. Okay, I'm going to zoom back. I'm going to go right here and just push up some right here. And I'm just trying to take away some of the straightness that you have from when we first made this shape. I'm going to pull down right there. Be very careful because there's not a lot of geometry right here if you go to use this smooth brush. Okay, we're going to zoom in. Okay, when I said as far as using the smooth brush, I meant right here. You don't want to click here by holding shift and totally smooth this out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to click here, then click here to go to the blob brush. We're then going to press F and then increase or decrease the size of that brush. We're going to zoom in more here, like that. Okay, there's a indent here on people. So what we're doing is we're making an indent. So now I'm holding control. So I'm just making that indent right there. Zooming back to take a look. For our nose, we can add extra detail right here. We're going to click here, go to the crease brush. I'm going to zoom in by rolling the middle mouse button, holding shift and middle mouse button to pan. Letting go, shift, and zooming in. So now I'm not holding control. I'm just coming up like this and then around here. And what I'm doing is I'm adding detail to the shape of the actual nostril here. And that's another, rolling the mouse wheel to zoom back, advantage of sculpting. That's very nice. Okay, what we're going to do now is click here, go back to the blob brush. We're going to hold control. And what we're doing here is we're making room for the eyes right here. holding the middle mouse button. When I hold the middle mouse button, a lot of times I'm turning to the side just to see how much depth I actually put here. It's hard to see often when you just look from the front. So when you work in 3D, typically it's front to the side like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click here. You can't see anything by me right clicking, but the 3D cursor should have moved here. I'm going to click here, then click here, and there's the 3D cursor right there. Okay, the reason why we have the 3D cursor here is because in Blender, where the 3D cursor is at, is where objects tend to come into Blender at. With the 3D cursor there, we're going to hold Shift while holding Shift, press A. This brings up our Add To menu. We're then going to go to Mesh and then UV Sphere. I'm going to left click here. Here's a UV Sphere. When this UV Sphere came in, if you look to your left, you'll see in a menu pop up that says Add UV Sphere. There's options for this menu. Depending on the power of your computer, normally when I would make an eye previously, I would go to segments, change this to 12. I would go to rings, change this to 12. If you're concerned about computer power, you can reduce the geometry of the sphere by doing that, changing segments to 12, as well as rings to 12. If not, you can just take the sphere as it is. I'm going to press Z, select Shade Smooth. I'm going to click here to go to edit mode for the UV sphere. I'm going to press R to rotate on x-axis 9, 0, and then press enter to lock that in. I'm then going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click here, then go to object mode. Now what I'm going to do is press S to scale this down. Like that. Okay, as far as the sphere, we want the sphere to be the general, size that you see right here. And what we want to do now is we want to not pull it back too far, but we want to pull it back so that it is, has kind of like this right here. That's what we want. So you can see it from the side and from the front. Okay, so now that we have this here, what we're going to do is click here on our main mesh. You can tell it's clicked on because we have this orange outline around it. We're then going to click here and then click here to go back to sculpt mode. The reason I didn't duplicate this eye to the other side is I like to work and get basically the eyelids, which is what we're about to do, right on this side, and then when that's right on this side, it's also right on that side. I then, tend to go out, duplicate this actual sphere, and then, move this over to that side. Okay, so we're going to zoom in. We're going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to hold Shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to press F to increase the size of my blob brush. Okay, what we want to do is aim right here. I'm actually going to press F to shrink the size of that brush some. And we want to have it in fairly smooth strokes. So like there we have our first layer. So now we'll go over that again. Okay, when you're drawing these eyelids, you pretty much want to do one stroke. So I left click, and I'm not doing it now, but I left click and dragged one, and then I did it again. And that's kind of what you want to do, because you want this to generally be smooth. You don't really want to go like this. I'm not pushing the button now. I'm just showing you for demonstration. You want like this, I'm not pushing the button. I'm just showing you for demonstration. Okay, so we have, that basic top eyelid there. I'm going to make it thicker to come down more of the eye. So I'm going to left click here. Now I am holding the button, and I'm just holding, and I'm going straight over, holding the entire time. And then now I let go of the button. I'm going to do again. Now I let go of the button. Okay, when I'm saying the button, I mean the left mouse button. I'm not sure why I'm calling it the button. I don't want to make it sound like it's something, strange and new. It's just a left mouse button. So now we want to do the same thing for this bottom eyelid. So I'm not pressing anything here. We just want one single stroke. Why am I, making a big deal about the eyes? Because as I've, sculpted more and more, I've struggled with the eyes at different times. Uh, and your eyes tend to be focused towards the eyes on a character. So what we're going to do is we're going to start from here. I'm left clicking and dragging. So it's one stroke going across. So now I'm letting go there. Now I'm going back. One stroke. Now I'm letting go there. Now I'm coming back to take a look. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put 2 more strokes over this bottom eyelid. So we're going to start here. That's just one, just left clicking and dragging all the way across. Then one more time. There we go. Okay, so we're going to zoom back. So we have, these thick eyelids here. Now, I don't like how the eyelids look right here. However, we did that for a reason. Eyelids, I find, tend to look good when they're sharp and when they are fairly thick. What I'm going to show you now, it's a pretty quick method that is pretty effective. What we want to do is sharpen these eyelids up. So we're going to click here. We're going to go to the crease brush, right? We're going to hold control, and then while holding control, we're going to go right on this edge to sharpen up this edge. I'm just holding control, and I'm just going over here to sharpen that edge up. Now I'm letting go of control. I'm coming back to take a look. Now I'm zooming back, and now we're going to do the same thing for the top eyelid. I'm holding control. Just the same thing, going over, making this eyelid sharp. Letting go of control now. Okay, now we're going to zoom back to take a look. Now we're going to zoom in. We're going to smooth this out by holding shift and go right along the bottom part. Of this eye like that. These are too thick, so to deal with that, we're going to click here, then we're going to click here to go to our pinch brush. We want them sharp, but we don't want them being the eyelids being quite this thick. Okay, so we're going to zoom in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch as we use this pinch brush. We want this line to move towards that way, towards the eye. However, we don't want this to angle up. We want this line being angled down. So I'm just going back and forth. You can see that line moving, and at the same time, we want this angled down. Holding them in the mouse button just to take a look. Do some work on the top. Okay, we'll zoom back to see what we have. And you can see that this is decreasing. When I say decreasing, I mean the the thickness. We want it thick but not super thick. I'm just decreasing the thickness. We'll take a look. Okay, I'm going to zoom back to take a look. Okay, we have all of our basic elements here. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off our dynamic typology. We're going to smooth out some of our face and change some of the different shapes that we have here. So I'm going to hover here. I'm going to hold shift. And while holding shift, I'm smoothing out. I'm going to press F, come back. Some of the details that I don't necessarily want. And because we took away the dynamic typology, we don't have as much detail. So it actually sometimes is easier to work having less detail. As far as moving basic, or major portions of a face. Okay, so I want this guy to have a stronger chin, so I'm going to go here. Pull his chin down, something like that. We have lost some detail in the crease. We can increase that. We can bring it back, I should say. So I'm just making his chin as well as his jaws thicker. A lot of times I think this is the fun part, is when you have your basic shapes in, now you can, for lack of a better word, you can kind of play now. So I'm just holding shift. You got to be careful when you do shift without dynamic typology. And when I say shift, what I mean is smoothing. Because you'll get a lot of smoothing. Sometimes you might get too much. I want to pull the nose down some. So I'm going to hold control. While holding control, hold shift. I'm going to draw a mask around the mouth. Okay, so we're going to pull the nose down. I might as well protect the eyes. I just held them in the mouse button to rotate. Holding control and shift to draw a lasso select around the eyes. So I'm going to hold them in the mouse button to turn to the side. I'm going to hold shift them in the mouse button to pan the view. As we don't have dynamic typology on, you want to make fairly subtle movements here. So I'm going to roll the mouse wheel back, turn back towards the front. And you can do it with right here. See that? That's not bad, but you got to be careful when you use your smooth with the dynamic typology turned off, so that you don't overdo things. And what's cool is the adjustments that we're doing here. I'm holding shift and I am left clicking again and again to smooth out this area here. Now I'm letting go of shift. What's cool is we have these masks on the eyes and the mouth. So what we can do is hold control and then press I. And then that lets us do more work on the mouth as well as the eyes without being concerned about affecting area around the eyes that we don't want to be affected. So I'm going to reshape the eyes somewhat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold control. Then while holding control, press I. I want to bring the brow down some. So I'm going to press F. Make my brush bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this brow down some. Like this. I think I'll click here. See, the eye is protected, so I'll actually make this thicker. And go back to the grab brush. And I'm going to hold Alt, and while holding Alt, press M to take away our mask. Now I'm just looking at this area here. I'm going to press F to shrink my brush, hold Shift, and I'm just smoothing this out. I'm trying to be at an angle where I'm not affecting the eyelids. Zooming back, I'll let go of Shift to do that. Now I'm holding Shift again. You can see that we can fairly easily change the shape of our face. Okay, we have our basic shape. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to zoom in by rolling the mouse wheel. Now I'm going to hold control. While holding control, I'm going to hold shift. I'm going to draw a mask right here. The reason why I did that was I wanted to protect this area here. So now I'm going to click here. Then I'm going to click the inflate brush. Okay, this mask here that I didn't draw, I drew the mask here. This isn't, this really doesn't matter for what I'm trying to do here. However, if you're drawing a mask and you really don't want this happens to you, you can click here, go to your actual mask brush, take the strength up to 1, and then go to subtract, and then you would just draw over this, and with that subtract, this part of the mask would, be taken away. So what I want to do is I want to inflate right here. This mask will help me, refine my shape. So I'm just going to click here like this. Take Take a look. Okay, so now I'm going to hold Alt. While holding Alt, I'm going to press M. So now I'm going to hold Shift. Just move this out here. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate. Okay, I'm rolling the mouse wheel back to take a look. I'm going to press F to increase the area of my size of my brush. I'm going to go to my grab brush and move this in like that. I'll smooth this out more like that. Smoothing this out right there like that. Okay, we do have a neck here, so what we're going to do is click here, go to the Blob Brush, press F and shrink the area of influence. We're going to shrink that more. We're going to come from right here, make this bigger, come to a V about like that. Then right here, just like this, we have all of this, which is too much. And just, you know, since the neck is here and we're in scope mode, it's fair. I'm holding Shift, by the way. Fairly easy to add detail like this. Okay, I like stylistic characters, so I'm going to push this character towards a more stylistic image. I'm going to click here. I'm going to go to the flatten brush. Now you can kind of use this flatten brush almost like a bevel brush in a sense. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to turn this dynamic typology back on. And basically when we flatten out an edge, in a sense there's two edges added to what you flattened out. So that's what I'm doing in the different areas that I want to be sharper. Press an F to decrease the area of influence from my brush. And I can come back with, see that right there? There's not a lot of geometry, so I can go to clay strips, press F, put this clay strips here, press Shift, and then with dynamic typology, there's now a lot more. I'm holding Shift and the mouse button, pan. No Shift here. I'm just adding geometry here. So now I'll click this, go back to that flatten brush, press F. You know, and when I'm rotating, I'm just holding the mouse button. I'm zooming in. Most of the time, I'm just rolling the mouse wheel. When I roll the mouse wheel, zoom back. I click here, go to my crease brush. Now for this, I'm actually just putting a crease in here just because I want a crease here. Now for here, I'm going to hold Shift and the mouse button to pan, zoom in. I'll hold Control with crease, and you'll see that sharp edge there. That stylized characters tend to have. I'm holding Control. I let go of Control when I zoom and a rotate or pan. Still holding control. Holding shift just to get rid of these. I guess you would call them artifacts. Roll in the middle mouse button and take a look. Okay, let's add some detail to this eye. I'm going to click here, go to object mode. I'm going to click on the eye. I'm now going to click here, go to edit mode. I'm going to zoom in. I want to grab these two loops right here. So I'm going to go to face select. I'm going to press C for paint select. I'm going to roll my mouse to increase the area of influence. Click here. I'm going to right click to get out of paint select. Okay, with this area selected, I'm going to press S to scale on the Y axis, -1. I'm then going to press enter to lock that in. I'm now going to press E to extrude. And then I'm going to right click to lock that in. With this area here selected, I'm going to press I to inset. Move my mouse very slightly to pull this geometry in. I'm now going to press A to deselect. Okay, now I'm going to hover right here, press C for paint select, roll my mouse wheel to shrink my paint select brush. I'm going to click right here, right click to get out of paint select. I'm then going to press I for inset, move my mouse slightly, left click. I'm then going to press E to extrude and then Y. And then push that in. I'm then going to left click to lock that in, then press A to deselect. Okay, I'm going to hold control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom in. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold control and the middle mouse button to zoom in more. I'm going to click here to go to edge select. I'm going to hold Alt. While holding Alt, I'm going to click on this edge right here. I let go of Alt. Because I was holding Alt, I selected that entire edge loop. The reason why I selected this is I want this edge to be hard, where you tend to have a bunch of edges together. You tend to have your geometry be hard. So I'm going to hold control. While holding control, I'm going to press B. You can see that dotted line right there. I just activated the bevel mode in Blender. I'm going to hold shift and then pull with my mouse for fine control. I'm then going to left click to lock that in. When you look to your left, you'll see there's a bevel menu right here. See where it says segments here? I'm going to take the segments up to 2. And again, I'm just doing this to put these edges here because I want this particular edge right around the inside of this eye to be a hard edge. So I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click here and then click here to go back to object mode. Okay, I'm going to hold control as well as the middle mouse button to zoom back. And I'm just holding control and just, repressing the middle mouse button to zoom back more. So now we have our eye there. I'm going to click here. When I click there, I actually selected the head. I'm going to click here to select the eye. I'm going to hold shift. While holding shift, I'm going to press D. And then I'm going to right click. When I did that, shift D, I duplicated this eye. So now I'm going to take the duplicated that's currently selected. And then I'm going to just take this manipulator and push this duplicate over here. Now I'm holding the middle mouse button just to take a look at what we have. And I like how he looks. Okay, I'm going to click on our main head mesh here. I'm then going to click here. Then click here to go to sculpt mode. We're on the crease brush, which is what I want. I'm going to zoom in. I'm coming here because what I want to do is just add some detail here. So I'm just using the crease brush to put some lines in right there. Okay, let's give them some eyebrows. To do that, we're going to click here. We're going to go to object mode. We're going to use a technique that's often used in Topology. We're going to right click here to put our 3D cursor here. The reason why we're right clicking here and putting the 3D cursor there is because in Blender, where the 3D cursor is at is where objects tend to come into Blender at. Okay, I'm going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. I'm then going to hold Shift, then press A. This brings up our Add To menu. I'm then going to select Plane. Okay, we just brought a plane in. We're not going to use the plane as it is. We just want to have one vertex from this plane that we can form our eyebrows with. So with the plane selected, what we're going to do is we're going to click here. We're going to go to edit mode, right? The plane is made up of 4 vertices. We're going to click here. We just want one vertex. We could get to one vertex multiple ways. The current way that I like the best is to hold Alt while holding Alt, press M. This brings up our merge menu. Then we'll choose at center. Now we have one vertex. So we merged all of the 4 vertices into one vertex. Okay, so the one vertex is most likely inside of our mesh. So let's push it forward, and right there, that should be it right there. So what you want to do is we have this one vertex. We're going to use this vertex, snap that to this mesh here. So what you want to do is use the view here and aim this vertex where you want it to be as far as it snapping to your mesh. So when I turn to the side, it's out here. It's, you know, a good amount of distance from here. However, you want to get it pretty much right where you want it, because once we set up these snap, once we adjust these snap settings, this will be connected to the mesh just like how it looks from this viewpoint here. To show you how to set up these snap options, I'm going to click here, go to object mode. We're still selected on our, one vertex here, right? What we're going to do is we're going to click here. This turns on our snapping options. This right here, we're going to click here. Then this opens up our snap element menu. We're going to select face. And then when that opens up, it's very important that you make sure that this is checked right here. And now with that done, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button. You see our vertex, our vertex is right here away from our face. However, we're going to click here, go to edit mode, right? Okay, now we're in edit mode. When I rotate, it's still hovering in the air. So even though the snap options are on and set up, this still is away from the face. Why am I showing you like that? Keep spinning, because when I first learned how to do this, I was like, it's not snapping. It's all set up. It's not snapping. And to basically make it snap, you press G. I'll move it a little bit just to make sure. Now I'll left click, and now you see that. So now when we turn, now it's snapped right to the face, which is good. So basically you sit there and say, well, why do we have one vertex? What can we do with this? Well, what we're going to do is we are going to, since this snaps right to the mesh underneath of this is right on top of this mesh, which is great. We're going to hold control, and we're just going to right click the general shape that we want our eyebrows to be, right? We have this group of vertices now. So now I'm going to press A. That deselected there. I'm going to press A again. So now we have this all selected. Now I'm going to hold Shift, then press D. I'm going to right click. We just duplicated that row of vertices. However, you can't see anything because we didn't move it yet. So we're just going to pull this up. And because we have these snap options on, this is snapped right to the face of our mesh. So what we're going to do is press A, that deselected. Then we're going to press A again to select both of these vertices or group of vertices. Then we're going to hold control. While holding control, we're going to press E. This brings up our edges options. And then we're going to go down to bridge edge loops. I'm then going to left click. And now we have those edge loops joined together by these faces. We bridge the edge loops. Okay, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to hover here. I'm going to hold control. While holding control, I'm going to press R. And I'm going to put in 4 loop cuts. I'm then going to left click, then left click again to lock that in. So now we have geometry for our eyebrow right here. Okay, so now that we have that, what we're going to do is click here, go to object mode. You can't see our geometry totally because it's, you know, partially being blocked because it's kind of like in our mesh. So we still have it selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold control. While holding control, press 2. We put a subdivision surface modifier on that geometry. I'm going to click here. You can see the options for that here. Now what we're going to do is click here. We're then going to go to solidify right here. So we're going to left click there. Okay, when you look here, you can see our solidify options. Solidify basically makes things thicker. So we're going to raise this up to try to make our eyebrow thicker, right? If you come to solidify and you increase the thickness and you're like, hey, it doesn't look like it's getting thicker, now look to your offset and then raise this up. So I'm going to hold them in the mouse button just to rotate, and now you can see, you know, there's our eyebrow here. So I'll make that thicker, and there we go. Okay, what we want to do now is have this on the other side. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold shift. While holding shift, press C. We're then going to go to our display, then click front. So we're in front orthographic mode here. I'm going to hover my mouse here, hold shift. While holding shift, press B. I'm going to draw a zoom box to zoom in. Okay, the reason why we put this 3D cursor here is because in Blender, where the 3D cursor is at, is where objects tend to come into Blender at. So we're going to hold shift. While holding shift, press A. This brings up our add to menu. We're then going to go to empty. Then we're going to select plane axis. So we just brought an empty in right here. And the important thing is that empty is right there in the center. Okay, so with that empty right there in the center, we're going to click on our eyebrow right here. We're going to go to tools here. We're going to look down to our auto mirror here. We're then going to left click auto mirror. Now we were brought into edit mode and we have a mirror on our eyebrow. So I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm then going to click here and then come back to object mode, right? So that's not what we want. When we look over here to our options, we can see here's our mirror options right here for our eyebrow. These 2 arrows right here allow you to raise your modifiers up and down. And they, you know, things do change as far as like how these modifiers are placed in the stack. So I'm going to click here, that raised that mirror to up here. I'm going to click here. Now the mirror modifier is on the top of the stack. However, you can see the eyebrow is still here. Doesn't have what we want there. However, we put a mirror, not a mirror, we put a empty object right here, right in the center where we want this other eyebrow to be at. So with the mirror modifier, one of the things we can do is, typically it works by its axis, right? What we can do though is we can make it mirror on an object. So guess what? We have a we have an empty object right here that we can use as our mirror object. We'll click here. There's the empty right there. We click there, and now we can see here is our other eyebrow right there. Okay, so looking at this, I want this to come over further, so I'm going to zoom in. I held shift and the mouse button to pan down. I'm going to click here, go to edit mode. I'm going to click here so we can actually see the geometry of our mesh here, our eyebrow mesh. I'm going to hold Alt, click here. I'm going to press O to turn on the proportional editing tool. You can see from here the proportional editing tool is turned on now. Okay, so with that turned on, we're going to press G. See how everything is moving? It's because the proportional editing is too big, so we'll roll the mouse wheel. Now we see it's shrunken down, and you just pull this right over like this. And because we have that snapping, this, it wants to snap right to here. See this long stretch right here? Let's put some more geometry in there. So we're going to hold Control, press R to put a loop cut right there. And we'll add. And I just put those loop cuts in so that we have more geometry as far as our eyebrows bending. Okay, so now I'm going to click here, then click here to go to object mode. Okay, I'm going to press A to deselect, and then I'm going to roll my mouse wheel to zoom back. I'm going to hold Shift and middle mouse button to pan up. Let's give him some hair. Okay, as far as working with hair, there's many different ways of doing it. My wife Sue right now is working on all kinds of different ways of doing it. This is a method I was just working with just recently. It's fairly quick. I think it looks fairly good. So here we go. So we're going to click display. We're going to click front. We still have our 3D cursor right there, which is good. We're going to hold Shift. Then we're going to press A. This brings up our Add To menu. We're going to go to Mesh. We're then going to bring in a cube. Okay, while we're here, let's click to turn off our Snap To menu. If you have an object inside of another object that you want to see, you can click here, look down to the display menu, and then put a check mark next to X-ray. So now you can see that object. With this selected, we're going to click here, go to edit mode. With our cube selected, we're going to press W to bring up our specials menu. We're going to select Subdivide Smooth. We'll press A to deselect. We can make this easier to work with by having this mirrored, and thanks to Blender 2.79, we can just come to Auto Mirror, click here, and now this is all set up with a mirror. We'll press A to deselect. Now we'll go to Display, and then click here to go to our right view. If we want to focus just on the hair that we're working with, see where it says right orthographic right here. We're also currently in global mode. I'm going to click here to go to local. So now it says right ortho loco. So what local mode is it's just a mode where we can work just on what we're working with and not be distracted by other objects. Other objects are still there. They're just currently hidden from view. So we're going to press Z, go to wireframe. We're going to click here to go to face select. We have our proportional editing turned on. I'm going to press O to turn that off. I'm going to hover here a little bit past the line, the edge right here. I'm going to press B for box select. Come a little bit past that line. It's going straight up and down there. So we select just this here. Now I'm going to press X to bring up our delete menu, then choose faces to delete. Now I am going to, now that we have that done, I'm going to click here to bring us back into global mode and out of local mode. Okay, now I'm going to hold the middle mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to turn off the X-ray by taking away this check mark here. What we're going to do now is press A to select our geometry. We're going to hold Control. While holding Control, we're going to press 2. So what that did was that put a Subdivision Surface modifier on here. We'll click here. And we can see that modifier here. Now what we're going to do is press A to deselect. Actually, we'll press... I pressed S to scale. I didn't want to do that. I want to hold Alt, then press S. This gives us a special kind of scale, which is if you press S to scale, everything selects. Everything scales. I mean, if you press Alt S, you kind of make things fatter. So in a strange way, it's a little bit like the Solidify modifier, but useful for what we're doing here. Normally I click this, which makes, like, see how you can kind of see like this transparent area. Normally I press this, because I like seeing the subdivision surface modifier look like it's applied. However, in this instance, I find this useful. So I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to click here to go to edge select. I'm going to hold Alt. While holding Alt, I'm going to click right here. Because I was holding Alt, we selected this entire edge right here. The reason why we selected that edge, see this space right here? We want this to look like it has more thickness than it has. If I rotate, you can see like right here, this is flat. So what we're going to do is we're going to press E to extrude, right click, right? We made new geometry right there. Because we have that new geometry, we're going to press S to scale in like that. Okay, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button to rotate the view. I'm going to press Z, then select wireframe. Press Z. Go back to solid view. I'm going to press A to select. I deselect. I'm going to press A to select everything. Hold Alt. Press S. I'm going to hold Shift for fine control. Make that a little bit fuller. I'm going to press A to deselect. I'm going to hold Alt. Click here. While holding Alt, I selected that edge. And now I want to extrude in more. Since I made this bigger. Okay, I'm going to press A and then A again to select everything. I'm going to press Z, then select Shade Smooth. We now have this mesh to work with here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here, go to Object Mode. I can click Apply as well as Apply. Another way, if you want to apply modifiers so that you know about it, that I learned about the other day, I was like, this is interesting. You can actually go to Object, Convert, and then select Mesh from Curve. Now you might sit there and say, well, that's strange. Why would you do that? Sometimes that's an interest. It wasn't needed here, but it's an interesting way to apply modifiers because it allows them to be applied, from what I can see, showing you what's here. Sometimes you'll apply the modifiers and things will change from what you're currently looking at. But when you do Object, convert to Mesh, even though curve from Mesh, whatever, even though it's not, doesn't sound like it's dealing with the situation, it's interesting. Anyway, now that we have this here, we have that applied, we have that subdivision surface modifier applied, we want to add more geometry to this. So we're going to click here, we're going to go to the multi-resolution modifier, then we're going to subdivide by 2 here. We're now going to click here, we're going to go to sculpt mode. Here in sculpt mode, we have this covering up the ears. I don't want that. I'm going to click tools, click here, go to inflate, deflate. I'm going to make our brush bigger. I'm going to hold control so we can deflate the hair around the ear. So we took our mirror modifier off, but remember we have our symmetry, that automatic symmetry mode that's in sculpt mode. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to click here. We're going to go to clay strips. Okay, so with clay strips, I'm going to press F to shrink the size of my brush. And we're going to basically draw hairlines. And because we have our mirror, it's going on in the other side as well. Just holding them in the mouse button to rotate the view. Holding them on the mouse button to rotate the view. Okay, now what we're going to do is click here, go to our snake hook brush. We're going to press F to make our brush bigger. Push the hair back. hold shift. When I hold shift, I am automatically smoothing. We'll also come back here. I'll make the brush bigger. Slide that down like that. Roll the mouse wheel in. Roll the mouse wheel in. Hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. Okay, now we're going to click here. Go to our Blob Brush. Press F. Pretty much do like we were doing with the clay strips brush. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. Just taking a look at this now. Okay, now I'm going to click here. I'm going to go to our crease brush. I'm going to hold Alt. And I'm doing this to sharpen the basic individual pieces of our hair. Hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. Hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. Okay, now what we're going to do is click here. We're going to go to the flatten brush. I'm going to press F to increase our influence. We're just left clicking here. Okay, now I'm left clicking and dragging. So we'll go back to our clay strips brush. Make this smaller. We use the flatten brush mainly to, take away some of that poofiness on the side. We'll go back to our blob brush. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we're on our tools panel. We're going to scroll down, look for symmetry lock. We're going to click here. We're going to unclick this X right here. Okay, so what that will allow us to do is to be able to have our hair be non-symmetrical. Be careful when you do this about this line right here. Now we can take our hair and push it to the side. Okay, I'm going to hold them in the mouse button and rotate the view. We're going to push it that way. So we could do the same thing back here. There's a little bit of variation to it. Holding shift and the mouse button to pan the view. I'm going to press F, shrink that brush down. Okay, let's do a similar thing and add detail to our eyebrows. We're going to click here, go to object mode. So we were in the sculpt mode for the hair. Now we're going to click on our eyebrows. We have all of these modifiers here, right? So we're going to go to object, convert to, mesh from curve. So even though this is not from a curve, and that's what I thought was strange about this, it works in the fact, and I was saying it before, that pretty much it applies the modifier so you get what you see here. So we're going to click here. So all those modifiers are applied. We want even more geometry here now. So we're going to click here. Then we're going to select multi-resolution modifier. Then we're going to click subdivide and then click subdivide again. Okay, what we're going to do now is with these eyebrows clicked on is we're going to click here, then going to click here to go to edit mode. So we'll zoom in. I'm going to hold shift as well as the middle mouse button to pan. Okay, I'm going to hold down shift. Remember, when we hold down shift, we automatically activate the smooth brush regardless of which brush we have right here. So I'm going to do that to smooth out some of the hard edges on here. So I'm just holding down smooth and just rubbing over this eyebrow here. It's interesting that for some reason, I'm not sure exactly why, but the mirror that is normally inside of sculpt does not tend to work on the other eyebrow. It's not that big of a deal. Just let go of shift. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to take this snake hook brush and basically use it to rough up that eye some. Now I'm going to take I'm going to go to the clay strips brush. Just go over just like this. And one of the things when you're typically sculpting, you see how rough that looks. Well, a lot of times we'll just use shift and then smooth things out. So I'm going to go to the Blob Brush, holding shift and the middle mouse button to pan. Shrink this. Shrink the brush down. Okay, I'll click here to go back to the snake hook brush. Press F to make the brush a little bigger, and I'm just taking away some of the squareness. Now I'm just holding shift and left clicking. Now I'm using the snake hook brush to pull. Now I'm left clicking again. Okay, I'm going to take this snake hook brush and let me press F. Something like that. Just pulling out these pieces. I'm going to go to the clay strips brush. Click here, go to the Blob Brush. You can zoom in, and zooming in is another way to control the size of your brush. So you can, like in other words, I can go like this, right? And then if I want to shrink this down, I can go like this. But then if I zoom in, my brush stays the same size. So it's like by zooming in, it's another way of, in a sense, controlling the size of your brush. smaller. I'm going to click here, go to Snake's Hook Brush. Okay, I'm going to press F to increase the size of my brush, and I'm just using the Snake Hook brush to get rid of the squareness of this edge here. Now I held the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm holding Shift to use this smooth brush. Roll the mouse button to zoom in, held Shift and middle mouse button to pan. Okay, I'm going to zoom back. I'm going to hold Shift and middle mouse button to pan. Hold the middle mouse button to rotate. I'm going to click here, go to object mode, click on the hair. Then I'm going to click here, and then click here to go to scope mode. Okay, I'm going to go to symmetry lock. We can see nothing is highlighted here, so I'm going to highlight this X, so now our symmetry lock is on. Okay, I'm going to click here to go to the front view. Normally your symmetry lock is on by default. Just wanted to mention that. What we're going to do now is we're going to hold Control. While holding Control, we're going to hold Shift, and then going to hold the left mouse button down. This allows us to do a lasso select. We're drawing these masks so we can adjust the hairline here. We don't need to draw a mask to adjust the hairline. It just makes things easier. So I'm going to click here to go to right view. I'm going to hold Control. While holding Control, I'm going to hold Shift. Then going to left click. Draw a lasso select right here. Okay, now we're going to click here to go to front view. We're going to click Tools. We're going to click here. Then we're going to go to the Inflate Deflate brush. I'm going to press F. We're going to hold Control and then just left click. Okay, now I'm going to hold Alt. While holding Alt, I'm going to press M to take off our mask. Okay, I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to click here to take off the symmetry lock. I'm going to press F to decrease the size of the brush. I'm going to hold Control. And I'm just left clicking there, letting go of Control. Okay, we're going to click here, go to object mode. We're then going to click on our main mesh, then click here, and go to scope mode. Okay, I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to click this X to make sure our symmetry lock is on. I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to hold Shift. I'm left clicking underneath this eye while holding Shift. Zoom in. Holding Shift to the middle mouse button to pan. Smoothing this out some underneath this eye. So now what I'm going to do is scroll up, click here, go to the crease brush. Zoom back and I'm going to hold Shift. Smooth that out some. I'm going to press F to shrink the size of the brush. I'm going to come right from the edge of this nostril here. Just go over it a couple times like that. And I'm going to press F to increase the size of the brush. Press F and then pull on the mouse. Now I'm just taking a look. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom in. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to hold control as well as hold the middle mouse button to do a smooth zoom in. I'm going to hold shift to smooth that out. Some there. Click here, click crease. Roll the mouse wheel to zoom in, holding shift and middle mouse button to pan. Okay, I did that with the chin just because it looked, a little rough there, so I wanted this line there. However, I wanted it to be a smoother line. I just held shift and just clicked there one time in the center. Roll the mouse wheel to zoom back. Just taking a look. Okay, we are done for sculpting with them. Let's put some color on them. Okay, so we're gonna click here, go to object mode. We're gonna hover over this, looks like a kind of like a triangle thing. It almost doesn't look like a button. It's got lines going through it. We're gonna left click there. I'm holding the left mouse button and dragging to the side. Now I'm letting go of the left mouse button. Now I'm going to click here. And then I'm going to click here where we see this says UV/image editor. So I'm going to left click there. Okay, this is a fairly dense mesh. Normally what we would do is retypologize this, put UV seams in this, then unwrap it, and then that would set us up to put our textures on this. However, even with this being as dense as it is, we can still do things like put a texture on this to help us, have this mesh have the look of having skin pores on it. Okay, so with our main mesh clicked on, we're going to click here, then click here to go to edit mode. So you can see how dense this mesh is. One of the reasons why you would retypologize this is so you can, fairly easily put seams in this. This is difficult to put seams in because the mesh is very dense. What we're going to do is we're going to press A to select everything. We're going to press U. This brings up our UV unmapping menu. We're then going to select Smart UV Project. This menu here pops up. You can leave these settings, as the default settings. Click OK. You can see that right there, because it's such a dense mesh, Blender is trying to figure it out. And there we go. Okay, so I had mentioned to you that normally we would UV unwrap this, and what I meant was what UV unwrapping basically is you manually go in, you put seams, and basically it's a way of taking a 3D object like this and laying it out flat, right? What we used was Smart UV unwrapping, and what that is that's where Blender basically looks at the mesh and then tries to figure out the best way to lay this out flat, which is what you see right here. We use that because the mesh is so dense. Okay, so basically over here, remember I said about laying this out flat? Think of this as being a flat table with our mesh laid out. However, when you look at the background, see how this is transparent? We need to put an image on this. So what we need to do is click New. This pops up here for New Image. I'm going to change this Untitled to AO, standing for Ambient Occlusion. Our default settings for our image is 1024. We're going to double this. We're going to change this to 2048. Basically, these numbers here, the more detailed, the bigger this is, you have the ability to have more detail. So I named this AO, not because I'm going to use ambient occlusion in the normal sense. I have a method that I use that I like that gives me kind of like a quick look of skin pores using ambient occlusion, though we're not going to use ambient occlusion in a regular way. Normally you use ambient occlusion to put like shadows basically it kind of looks like shadows. Generally makes your mesh look better. We're using this for actual skin pour, so we're gonna click OK. All right. So there's such density in here that you can barely see what's going on. But when you look here, see where this says image and it has this little asterisk sign. This means that this image isn't saved. When you are working with textures in Blender, when you save your Blender file, you save this, right? But the images that you put on as textures have to be saved separate to then Blender. Sounds more complicated what it is. Basically, typically what you do is you have a folder that has your Blender file, and then you have a folder that has your textures in it. So they're all pretty much, if you organize your files right, in the same place. Okay, what we're going to do is click here. We're then going to click Save As Image. Make sure you know where your file is going to. What we're going to do now is click here. This will make a new folder. This pops up where it says New Folder. We're then going to name this Textures. Then press Enter. Okay, so we made the folder. We're not in the folder yet. We're going to left click to go inside of that folder. We're then going to click Save As Image. So now there's no asterisk sign here because the file has been saved. Okay, be aware that if you save your Blender file but don't save your texture file, when you open up your Blender file that you saved, typically you will lose the work you did with your texture. So I'm going to press A to deselect, and I'm going to click here, then go to Object Mode. Okay, here in Object Mode, what we're going to do is we're going to click right here. We're going to scroll down. See where we see this thing that says Bake? We're going to click here, and now we see these options for Bake here. Okay, baking something is basically a way in Blender of locking something in. What we want to do is click here and then click Ambient Occlusion. Okay, so on this mesh that we have selected, previously we used Smart UV Unwrap to set up a UV for this. We also then made an image to be used with that UV Unwrap. And with those things previously set up, and now with our head selected, our head mesh selected here, now we can click Bake. And when you look here, you can see the progress of the bake going on. You can see the bake happening over there. Okay, now when we look and we see this image, we see that asterisk sign there. So what we're going to do is left click here. And then I'm going to click Save As Image. Click here. Then click Save As Image. So now our this file is now saved. And when you look here, that little asterisk sign is no longer there. Okay, ambient occlusion, again, and normally you use it to help with shadows. It tends to make things look very good. That is not why I did this ambient occlusion bake, though. Though I would recommend you to use ambient occlusion bakes. It makes your models tend to look good. I see this roughness right here. What I found is that by using this roughness, we can use this for skin pours. Okay, so how do we do that? We're going to click here to go to our material tab. We're then going to click here. Okay, so when we look here, this is our texture, right? So basically, texture is connected to the material. When we look here, we want to, wait a second. See where it says type here, none. What we want to do is click here. We then want to click image or movie, right? When we do that, our settings change. Now we click this arrow here, and we can see our AO there. This is the file we made up. We also could choose open and then search for it. But Blender typically knows, when you just made something, you click there. So we'll click this. So here you can see this texture right here. So now what we're going to do is scroll down. We have this mapping saying coordinated. We don't want that. Generate. Sorry, coordinate saying generate. We don't want that. We want this to say UV. So now we have this influence. This is very important. Normally, if you wanted the color for something, what you would do is you would click here, and this would make sure the color was activated. We're not going to use this for the color. We're going to use this for the normal geometry right here. Okay, so we're not going to use this for color, so we're going to click here. Currently, we can see our model nicely lit up. We're in solid view. We need to go to material view to see our work here. So we're going to click here and then click here to select material view. Okay, normally in material view, you would have to set up your own lighting. However, we're using Blender 2.79. So when you go to File, User Preferences, go to Add-ons, make sure you have a check mark next to Object, Add Advanced Objects. So when you have a check mark next to Object, Add Advanced Objects, now when you hold Shift and press A, you'll see this right here, this lighting sets. So now you can go from lighting sets to try lighting. And then basically Blender will set up an automatic 3-point lighting system set for the object you have selected. I believe it's you have selected. So now see how this is too bright. So what we do is click here. This light, this main light right here, there's a bunch of lights, but you can tell this is the light right here. Click on that. Click here for your light option. See where it says energy right here? It says 3 or 3.000. Looks like 3000 to me, but it's 3. We're going to click here, and then we're going to change this to 0.5 and then press enter to lock that in. Okay, what we're going to do now is zoom in. We're going to click on our mesh. We're then going to click materials, then click texture. Now what we're going to do is scroll down. See where this says geometry? You see this slider that says normal right here? We're going to put a check mark right here. Okay, when we came here, I didn't click on material and texture without thinking about it. Sometimes in Blender, when you click the object you're working with and then material and then texture, when you click in that order, that helps Blender to know which texture you're working with. When we look here for our normal, we have the setting set for 1. We want to click here and change this to 0.5 and then press enter. And what this does is this gives us kind of like the look of skin pores. I find that ambient occlusion does a decent job of giving us this look, and I think it looks fairly well. Okay, so now that we have that set up with our main mesh selected, what we're going to do is click here. We're then going to click on Texture Paint. When we click on Texture Paint, we have these options here shown to us. Okay, so our UV here is basically our 3D mesh laid out flat here. When you're in Texture Paint, this slots panel is very important. This AO right here is giving us the look of these skin pores here. We do not want to paint on top of this. So how do we not paint on top of this? We add another texture paint slots. We'll click here. We'll then click diffuse color. This is the name of our new texture paint slot that we want to use so we don't paint over this. We're going to click here. We're going to change this name to main color. We're then going to change this width to 2048. We're then going to click here, then change the height to 2048. We then have the main color. Currently the main color is black. What we want to do is click here. We only see black right here in our color selector. This slider we want to click to make this go up. So now we want to click whatever we want the skin color to be, the general skin color. We can make that here. So with this set for the general skin color, now with all of these things set up, we'll click OK. So now we can see that color right here. Okay, so we set this up so we wouldn't paint on this, right? And we can see this is separate from this. However, when we look here, it says AO here. So that AO here that we don't want to paint on is right here. So what do we have to do to get to this? We click these arrows here and then select main color. So now that we have this main color here, we also see this image here with the asterisk sign. So we want to click image, click save as image, and then we want to click save as image. So this image is saved. because when we work with textures, we need the Blender file as well as the texture file saved. Okay, so we have this color on here. We can paint on top of this as well, even though we have the main color. That's one of the advantages of using a texture instead of just using a material. So see how we have a lot of specularity here? We can click here on our material tab. Here's our specularity right here. So this intensity basically gives us how much shine is there. So there's a lot of shine there for human skin. So by reducing this, now we have this, without as much shine on there. Okay, when I look at the mouth right here, it looks like this could use a little bit more detail. So we're going to click here, go to object mode, then click here, go to sculpt mode. We're going to zoom in. I'm going to press F to decrease the size of the brush. And just using the crease brush like this, we can add more detail. So now we're going to click here, then click here, zoom back, then click here, and then click here to go to texture paint mode. By the way, when we adjusted the specularity for the materials, that did not affect our images over here. Materials and textures are very similar, but they're not exactly the same. Okay, so here in texture paint, we are currently selected on AL. We don't want to paint on that. We want to paint on the main colors. We're going to left click here so that we're selected on the main color. Okay, so with that selected, we're going to click on tools. This is the main tool we want to use. When we click here, we can see our different tools here. The texture paint is the main one that we're going to use. I'm going to left click there. So now we're selected on that. Are still selected on that. We're going to go towards a reddish color here. We're going to take our strength down. So currently we have this set for 0.180. And what we're going to do now is we're going to press F to increase our area of influence. And we're basically going to paint over some of the areas in human skin that tend to have a decent amount of blood flow. Okay, so since we added color, when we look here, see this asterisk sign is here again. So we're going to click image, save as image, and then we're just going to click save as image. So now that we did that, that asterisk sign is gone and our texture file is saved. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to click here. We're going to go to object mode. We're going to click on this hair. We're going to click, we're in our material tab here. We're going to click new. Let's give my fairly dark brown hair. Once we have that material on there, what we can do is we can actually, with this material selected here, we can grab this here. So I'm going to left click right here. I'm holding and I'm going over the eyebrow, and then I drop that color right on top of the eyebrows. Pretty cool. Okay, so now we're going to click on our eyes, or not one of our eyes. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to click new. I'm going to take the specularity all the way up. I'm going to click ramp. Where we see this input shader, I'm going to click here. I'm going to change this to normal. For this specular, which says core torque, I'm going to click here, change this to or this so. Okay, and just so you're aware, I'm adjusting the material. I'm not adjusting an actual image as in a texture here. Okay, so with that done, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click this plus button here. So there's two, plus buttons. The one underneath, the one to the right. I'm doing the one to the right. And then I'm going to click new. Okay, so when you look here, see how this is core torque. This doesn't have the word disso. This doesn't have the ramp. When I click here, you see those options here, right? So what I'm going to do is I have this basic material, and then I have this one that has, some changes on it. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to click copy material, and then I'm going to click here. Then I'm going to click here, and then click paste material. So now this is a separate material, but it has the same setup that we did for that material. Okay, the reason why I did that was now we can do what we want with this material, but not affect this material here. So with this eye selected on, we're going to click here, go to edit mode. We're going to zoom in. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. Click here for face select. I'm going to press C for paint select. Paint here. Right click to get out of paint select. I got out so I could rotate the view. So I held the middle mouse button to rotate the view. Now I'm pressing C for paint select. Right click to get out of C for paint select so I can rotate the view. And I'm clicking here. Don't be alarmed about that. Okay, so now we have all of that in there. So we'll zoom in, hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. We'll hold C for paint select, and we'll hold the middle mouse button. And by holding the middle mouse button, we can deselect here. I'm going to right click to get out of paint select, hold the middle mouse button. I'm going to press C for paint select and reselect right there. With that done now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this diffuse. I'm going to take this to about there. Then I'm going to click assign. So now I'm going to press A to deselect. I'll click here, lower that like that. I'll zoom back some. I'll press A to select everything, then A to deselect everything, just so I know that nothing is currently selected. Okay, what I'm going to do now is click this right plus. We have a new material, space that popped up. We're going to click new here. There's nothing set up for here. So I'm going to click here, click copy material, then click here, then click here, then click paste material. So now we have, the shine basically is why I did this, set up for this. However, we can change this, and only this material will be affected. Okay, so we're on face select, so I'm going to hold Alt. While holding Alt, I'm going to click here. I'm going to hold Shift as well as Alt, then trying to click that edge right there. Click there. There we go. Now I'm letting go of Alt. I'm holding Shift and clicking here. Now I'm letting go of Shift. So now I'm going to click here on the material we just made. I'm then going to click here. Then click like that. I'll then click Assign. I'll then click here, then click Assign. I'll press A to deselect. Coming back on the object mode to take a look. Okay, I want that to be darker than that. So now I should be able to click here because we have this material on here. Now I can go to select similar, and then click material. So now we select everything that has that material. So I'm going to click here, make that much darker. I'll click here, make that a lot darker. I'll zoom back, I'll click here, then go to object mode. Not quite what I want. I'm going to click here. Okay, so what I'll do here is click this. I'm holding Alt, I'll click here. This is basically what I want. Now, by holding Alt, I can select this entire edge. So with that edge selected, I'll click Assign. So now that has that there. So now I'm going to hold Alt, then click here. I'm going to click the plus, click New. I click the plus to the right, and I click here, click copy material, then click here, then click paste material. So now we can adjust this without being concerned about anything else being selected. So now, being affected, not selected, affected. So I'll click here, this much darker. I'll click Assign. Come back, take a look. Okay, so now with that done, we'll click here, hold Shift, then click here. We'll then click Control L. This brings up a make links menu. We'll click materials. That did not work, so we'll hold Control, press L. Now we'll choose object data, and that worked. And what that did was that just copied the materials to here. So press A to deselect. Okay, I like how the eyes look. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to left click here and hold, drag this to the side. That took away that window there. I'm going to zoom back. Okay, so we have our head, our male head mesh here. By the way, if you want to adjust the eyes without rigging them, you can click on an eye, hold Shift, then click on another eye. So now I let go of Shift. Both these eyes are currently selected. If you go here and then select for your pivot point, the default pivot point is usually medium point. If you change this to individual origins, what you can do now is press R to rotate on the Z axis or the X axis. And that's what when you can adjust your eyes, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to left click. I'm going to press R to rotate on the Z axis and have them look to the side, something like that. I'm going to press A to deselect now. Okay, I'm going to click here on the pivot point options. I'm going to change this pivot point from the individual origins that's currently set on back to Blender's default pivot point, which is the medium point. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel back, hold them in the mouse button just to take a look, and I like how he turned out. Okay guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel and we share those videos, thank you. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe, and thank you for viewing.